Let's talk about the manufacturing and exporting of clean electrotech, Tim, because I think we've seen this in the last couple of years in particular, with the, Fortress North America, big tariffs on Chinese imports and then some lesser import tariffs on from Europe, but still tariffs. And so China seems to have made this very deliberate pivot into the global south. And the global south just seems to be gobbling it up as fast as they can get solar panels and wind turbines and EVs.
Yeah, it is an amazing. I'm inspired by what China's doing, and I say that I sit in Australia. Australia is an ally of America, a military ally of America, and for many decades we've considered China to be our biggest military threat. And but we run that, and I say that very deliberately because China is our number one trade partner. So I spend most of my time lobbying for better Australian political relationships with China. You've got to understand your number one trade partner. You don't have to agree with them. You've got to understand them, and you've got to treat them with respect. And so 30% of Australia's exports go to China. It's not a great idea to attack your number one trade partner. So put that in. So I am in awe of what they're doing, though, and they're also delivering on the Paris Agreement. And that is critical because we need a livable planet before we can worry about economics and who wins the war. So China dominates the world in clean technology development, research and development. The technology spending they do is unbelievable. And I say that I've been studying companies for 40 years. Only Tesla comes close to investing in R&D the way BYD does, the CATL, the Jinko Solars of the world. It's just staggering how much money they invest. They're very long strategic thinkers. They dominate the world in manufacturing, as you said. They dominate the world in terms of installation, domestic installation of all those technologies. Like 65% of the world's EV sales this year are in China. 60% of the world's solar installs are in China. 70% of the world's wind installs this year will be in China, onshore and offshore. It's just staggering what they do. But they're also dominating the world in terms of exports of that clean tech. And as you said, as America's put more and more emphasis on a trade war to attack China, China has pivoted to other countries. And so what we are seeing is the rise and rise and rise of the BRICS. Now, BRICS was a meaningless acronym of Brazil and India and China and Russia. Then they added South Africa, sorry. But now the BRICS is 41% of world GDP in 2025. There's a brilliant Bloomberg analysis of that put out about 2 months ago. The BRICS is now bigger than the G7. And the BRICS is where all of the growth in GDP, the majority of the world growth is coming from. India is growing at 6-7% GDP growth per annum, and it has been for a decade. China is still growing at 5% per annum and is going to continue to grow at maybe 4% per annum for the next decade. So a lot of the world, ASEAN, the Southeast Asia is a major growth sector. 660 million people live in Southeast Asia. So it's a huge part. There is a pivot towards the Asian century, and China, as it reduces its dominance or its exports to America, forced or otherwise, they are pivoting their focus and growing their collaboration with the BRICS. So it's amazing to see China's exports year to date in 2025 in the middle of the biggest trade war in world history, and their exports globally are up thanks to the BRICS.
One of the points that gets made actually by Bloomberg in an article I was reading is the China's willingness to indulge in or engage in industrial diplomacy. What they want is they want to not only open up markets, they want, through their Belt and Road Initiative, they're investing in infrastructure like the big port that was recently opened in Peru. And they're also building plants. And some of them are manufacturing plants, some of them are just assembly plants for things like automobiles. But that seems to be building local, and so that you're creating jobs locally and investment. That seems to be a big part of China's new strategy.
I see that as probably the most important aspect of China's latest clean tech world dominance. So we talked about R&D, we talked about manufacturing, we talked about domestic installs, we talked about exports. outbound direct foreign investment by Chinese clean tech leaders like CATL, like BYD, like Longi. Those companies are now, exactly as you said, taking Chinese technology, Chinese manufacturing capacity, Chinese capital, and taking it to the world. Now, it's not just indiscriminate. They're going global. Like they were happily building battery factories in America and solar factories in America till Trump said they're not welcome. So they've pivoted. They've pivoted to the global south. You know, you use the Belt Road Initiative. 10, 15 years ago, I was actually quite a big critic of the Belt Road Initiative. It was a very one-sided geopolitical strategy of China. It was taking Chinese capital, Chinese manufacturing, Chinese workers, and building mega projects around the world and then asking those countries to pay for it. It was a bit of a debt trap, and Pakistan was a clear example of that, building a $50 billion hydro facility that the poor people of Pakistan couldn't afford, and then taking 10 to 20 years to do it, but worse, using Chinese labor, 100% Chinese labor. But 10 years later, the strategy is far, far more strategically sensible. And I'll use your word, it is an industrial strategy, it's a geopolitical strategy. It's about building strategic alliances by a win-win-win situation. China wins by building manufacturing capacity using their technology and dominating world markets. The recipient country gets manufacturing capacity, manufacturing investment, local jobs. Usually it's tied with an R&D center from the Chinese company, which again is a little different to what we think, that China's only going to do a kit factory where they keep all the technology, all the value adds in China, and they just do the basic assembly. They're actually offering countries like Spain, like Malaysia, like Brazil, like Turkey, like Hungary, manufacturing and R&D operations. So you might get 1,000 new jobs, skilled value add manufacturing. You replace imports, you get exports from it, but you also get research and development. So it's a win for the recipient country. It's also a branded goods strategy. So we could come to EVs, but that I think is why it's changing. At the end of the day, if you're going to Brazil as BYD, you're actually selling a high value consumer brand product. In Australia, BYDs are the number one electric vehicles for sale in 2025. They've overtaken Tesla, which is great news. But what we're seeing with the outbound direct foreign investment is definitely a geopolitical strategy by China to say, well, if America wants to start a trade war, we will go elsewhere and we will invest in other nations. So when Europe starts putting trade barriers on Chinese exports, what does CATL do? They announce a €4 billion investment in a factory for batteries in Spain in partnership with Stellantis. And that way they win for Spain, win for the workers of Spain, but they also aren't then relying on Chinese imports.